Okay, so I think we're ready and excited to get started with our event. Thanks for those who are joining. I'm sure others will start trickling in as we continue this presentation. Before we ramp up, just a couple of public service announcements. One, thank you and appreciate the patience from all those who were expecting this event last month. On the accruant side, at least, we were very excited to start with this and to have the event going. And then, of course, COVID-19 happened. We felt it was best to cancel the on-site, and then we kind of circled back and decided to have a remote session. So the presenters were gracious enough to be flexible with their calendars and do this today. That said, we are using Zoom right here. So as best practice, you'll notice as you were trickling in, you were muted and your camera was turned off. We'd like for you to keep the camera off unless you're presenting, and then that's when it makes sense to kind of show your face. And then you should stay muted. You shouldn't be able to unmute, but hopefully, if you do have the temptation to unmute yourself, please, while the presentations are going on, just stay muted for the sake of the presenters who have spent some time coming up with slides and are ready to present for us. We know it's important for you guys to network in these events of ours. So we got a little creative towards the end. We'll announce how we're thinking about doing that networking time as well as the Q&A session. We'll actually be leveraging our Slack channel, and I'll present a slide of which one exactly. But if you're already there, please go ahead, feel free to log in. As the presenters are presenting, you can then log your questions and then say who the question is for. Sarathi and I will try to monitor that throughout the presentations, and then we'll, in the Q&A time, kind of dish those out to the presenters as is. Okay, so once again, if we were in a room and everybody was unmuted, I'd ask everyone to welcome the three guests. Thank you so much for taking the time to work on this, to really consider what we were trying to present here between ProductTank and Accruent. Regarding making smart product bets. So we have Michael Durrell, Les Wilson, and then Mark Stephan will close us out at the end. So thank you for your time. Again, thank you for your flexibility in delaying this a couple of days, well, actually a month. So how are we doing against the agenda? We did the welcome. We'll talk a little bit about our sponsors and do some introductions there. I've been mentioning some housekeeping throughout this time, so I think we're doing well there. Then, of course, we'll jump into Michael Durrell, who will talk about growth accelerator methodology. Les Wilson, product bets, the assumption guidance, and Mark Stephan, consistently making smart product decisions. So these are very good topics. I think we're all very excited to hear more about them. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have the panel Q&A. And as you can see towards the bottom, if you use management chat, that's where you can make your questions. And then Sarathi will wrap it up for us by running the Q&A time and then doing some closing remarks. And then we will facilitate the networking by going into 3 separate links. So towards the end, around 8:10, 8:15, we'll release on the Slack channel 3 different Zoom links, one of which is this one actually. And then you can go to that link depending on how you're supposed to be broken out. And then we can do some networking there. Maybe everybody can unmute at that time. One of the presenters is assigned to each of them so that you can continue to ask them questions. And that's kind of how we'll run that time, if that makes sense. What you could be doing right now, actually, is looking at this link and logging in, ProductTankAustin.com. And once again, I'm just repeating it so that it makes sense. The questions will be asked here under the channel of management chat. So this is our Slack community. We use it to interact with one another, let each other know how best practice is or what kind of jobs are out there. So as far as our sponsors, I'm representing ProductTank, but I'm also representing Accruent, where I've been working for, 8+ years now combined, and very happy to work here. We help organizations manage physical resources. And we do that through a suite of products. We have a lot of products that pertain for project management, work order management, lease management, document management, anything that is required to help those companies manage their physical resources. We basically have under our portfolio, and we serve a bunch of industries: healthcare, retail, telecom, government, etc. So it's a fun place to work at. We're pretty passionate about products, voice of the customer, making sure we're making the right product bets, which is why we picked this topic. So we're excited to host everybody, at least via Zoom. and hope you have you enjoy this presentation. And so I think at this point, Mark is actually from ProductHired, and he kind of speak a little bit about that.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm not only a speaker and a product tank organizer, I'm also one of the sponsors. Aren't you enjoying that pizza that I brought? Anyways, hey, we'll take it. So yeah, ProductHired is a job site. I know a lot of you might be looking, whether you've been looking or you just recently started looking. Check out ProductHired. Because of COVID, we definitely understand that companies are having a hard time, paying like LinkedIn and stuff. So for companies that are actively hiring product roles, and that's product management, product marketing, product design, there's a whole bunch of others. We are setting our bronze plan for free. And what that'll do is that'll put you at the very top of the search so that anybody who comes to our site and sees that you're highlighted, they'll know that you are actively looking, because I know it's, a lot of stuff from Indeed and others are just jobs that just are languishing out there. They're not really active. So go ahead and definitely post your jobs on ProductHired.com, and that way people will know you're hiring. So thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you, Mark. Okay, just a little bit of the history on ProductTank on 2010 in London. Somebody figured out that product role can be a little lonely. And so I think a lot of us can resonate here. It's nice, bigger companies where you have other product managers, but not everybody has that luxury. Sometimes you're a soldier of one in your organization. And so the whole goal here was to meet and learn from others. That's the best way to kind of grow as a product manager. And so now, fast forward till today, 185 plus cities, 50,000 members. So it's a little less lonely. And if you go to events like Mind the Product or other Product Tank events, you can kind of see we're really all about sharing best practices and bettering one another up. So the meetups are, as I mentioned, for product people, but by product people. No one else is around. It's just us organizing, talking to one another, making sure we coordinate with speakers and one another so that we can discuss the topics that we want to discuss. Mostly we say they're informal meetups that bring the local product community together, whether you're a product manager, designer, developer. We want to know about your experiences and about your knowledge. That's how we learn, that's how we get better. What we're not about is sales pitches. We're not here to kind of promote anything. We're here to promote the practice of product management, if you will. So we do networking events, lunches and happy hours. We're usually pretty good about having a happy hour once every other month. We're getting very creative about it now. I think Mark is running some virtual happy hours. So it's kind of nice to go ahead and network that way. And then we have events like this one, about 6 a year, where we have 2 to 3 speakers have a conversation, get it started, talk about a topic that we feel passionate about, and then have some discussion and networking after that. So we're all about sharing, learning, and having network and having fun. We do keep an eye out for one another as well. If you're specifically in that Slack community, there is a job club there where you can find job postings that other stuff we know about in our companies, or you can post your own to try to make sure someone within that community sees it and can take advantage of it. And then there's things like Mark mentioned for ProductHired that there's have job clubs as well. That's all about just making sure that product people have product jobs out there. So you can get involved, in any way you want. The best way probably is to tweet about the event, to share it on social media, LinkedIn, etc., and go ahead and use @PTATX for either the @ or the hashtag. You want to volunteer, I'm sure you can reach out to one of us to learn how you could do that. If you're interested in speaking, we're happy to take what your topic would be, and when it makes sense, we can let you know that we're about to discuss something along those lines and reach back out to you, and that's the URL where you would go and submit your idea or topic for what you want to talk about. Or you can raise your hand up and say you would like to volunteer your company to either be host or sponsor a happy hour or a talk like this. So the way I got involved was by volunteering accruent. This nice layout behind me is where we had a discussion kind of like this when I was just a guest. And then I got a little bit more involved in actually becoming an organizer. So that's one way to do it as well. So now, hopefully I give enough time for all the speakers to pull up their slides, and I'm buying you a little bit more time to make sure you have those. What I'll do now is I'll kick it off to Michael Grell. I get to work with him. I get to interact with him. I was just kind of reviewing his presentation the other day with him, and I was really excited about what he was going to talk to us about. So I think with that, I'll kick it off to him. Michael, I'm going to stop sharing, and then after that, you're up.
Sounds good. All right, let's see. Can you guys confirm that you see my presentation?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Too bad we can't meet in person. That would be great. But one day, very hopefully at some point, we will be able to get together in person. But yeah, as Israel mentioned, I work with him over at Accruent. My role as Director of Data Strategy is essentially I've been asked to figure out how we take all the data that comes in through all of our maintenance management software platforms and build out new tools to help our customers make better decisions. So what I wanted to talk to you today is about some of the growth accelerator methodology. I've had the opportunity to go through 3 accelerator programs. One, I had a startup before this, and so we went through the Austin Technology Incubator, which is an accelerator through the University of Texas. I did DreamIt Ventures, which is a startup accelerator, and then through Fortive, which is our parent company. They're a $7 billion multinational conglomerate that owns Accruent. They also had a growth accelerator, which is some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about too, where they're taking ideas within individual operating companies and helping accelerate their growth as well. So it's kind of a neat resource that a large organization brings to us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about me, but my slides don't want to advance. I'll try it this way. There we go. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. I moved to Pittsburgh to go to college at Carnegie Mellon. So I studied mechanical engineering. Eventually I got my MBA here at UT. I started my career at Dell doing notebook design and then eventually moved over to server design. I left Dell back in 2008 and I went to a smaller company that made rugged tablet PCs called Broadway Technology. I ran product and product development for Explorer. Did that for 5 years and then decided to start my own company called IQ. We raised some venture money. The goal was to help brands optimize their in-store displays. And so we started out with an extremely complex solution that was digital signage based and very analytical and very complicated. We ended up getting down to an simple IoT device that measured traffic in front of a shelf. And then we ended up selling that in 2018. And then I joined Accruent. And some of my passions, I've got 2 young daughters, wife, and so family is definitely a passion. And then I've been flying for about 25 years now. So I love to fly. I love my family and I also love startups. And because this is Austin, we have to have a dog. So we adopted Emma, our 4-year-old Vizsla, exactly a year ago. So that's a little bit about me. So some of the things I want to talk about today are some of the principles that I go by, and this is certainly not all of them, and I'm sure everybody has their own, and there might be some overlap here, but really some of the things that I like to follow is I really want to make sure that every time that I'm building product that I'm focusing on the customer needs and not what the competition is doing, because if you're focusing on the competition, you're going to be behind the curve. So really, I like to be aware of my competition, but I really don't care about what they're actually doing as much as I care about making sure that I'm delivering what my customer needs to get their job done, right? Experiment rapidly and regularly. I'm going to talk about experimentation a little bit later, but this is where you create these experiments that are based off of these uncertainties that you have that you want to answer, and you're creating these experiments that take no more than 2 weeks. So that you can get answers and rapidly iterate and move your product forward really, really quickly without heavy investment in something that may not be valuable. Gemba it's a term that's actually used pretty regularly around Fortive and Accruent, and it's all about going to where the work is done, and then I added and observing. So for us, being a kind of a software firm, I've spent a lot of time in front of my customers watching them use our software. I've spent a lot of time with my customers watching them do their own jobs and how they use our software. And by going to where the work is done, you're trying to really understand the day-to-day life that they have and the challenges that they face and what you build and how it can really help them. And then you can also observe how they're using your software, because you'll likely find that they're using your software differently than you expected them to. And this could impact a lot about how you're building your software. Starting with a minimum viable product is another one. Now, this is something where when I started my company, IQ, we definitely did not start with an MVP, and we invested a lot of money in something that wasn't actually valuable. But with Accruent, what we'll talk about a little bit later, the product that we launched, Data Insights for Healthcare, we started with definitely with a minimum viable product, a product that we built in less than a month, that we built, launched, and then started getting POs off of. But it was certainly, it was very, very feature poor. But what it did is it added value, and then we could start building features off of that. And at that point, we know we're not investing poorly, right? What's kind of interesting is the product that we actually ended up with at IQ, my company, the much more simple, essentially traffic counter, was really what my market research told me was what we needed when I first started the company. If I went back through my notes, it was kind of an interesting, interesting event there. And then measure everything. I'm all about data. I'm all about measuring how customers are using our software, but I'm also all about defining the right metrics, and we'll talk about a little bit about that as well. So real quick on Fortive, like I mentioned, they're our parent company, and they wanted to create these growth accelerators within the large organization. I mean, Fortive is about 30,000 employees. And what this does is this helps really build an innovation pipeline. It helps create a really nice culture of innovation and culture of risk-taking, and creating a new set of tools that the organizations can use. And what they focus around is this build, measure, learn cycle. So you build experiments, which are those really quick 1 to 2 week experiments. You measure the results, you learn from them, and then you iterate. And this way you're continuing to move forward without heavy investment in ideas that aren't valuable. And one of the first things that we do is customer interviews. So you hear voice of the customer a lot. We definitely focus a lot on voice of the customer, getting out in front of your customers, start asking them about their pain points, their challenges. Chances are you're probably building something that they don't even know that they could have, right? They don't even know it exists. That many times is the case when you're building something new. But what you need to do is understand what some of their challenges are, so that you can make sure that at least what you first present to them in that MVP is something that you find, or at least that they would find valuable. So we have a lot of customer interviews up front and then throughout the whole process. And even afterwards, I still have regular interactions with customers that are using our product that's, I wouldn't say it's fully baked anywhere close, but it's a lot more baked. So continue to stay ahead of your customer. And that's really how you stay ahead of your competition, because the customer is going to tell you what they need and to get their job done, or at least what their challenges are that you can build solutions for. And the reason why we experiment, so moving into the experiment piece of it, the reason why we experiment, like I was talking about before, is you just don't want to be wasting time. So Eric Ries is the author of Lean Startup. He's got a few books out now. A lot of startup founders really go by his methodology. I went by his methodology, and clearly didn't follow it super closely, but Fortive as well, through the Growth Accelerator, really focuses on Eric Ries and Lean Startup, and has hired actually his company as consultants to help facilitate the program. So, but anyway, you could use experimentation to avoid wasting time. And so what is an experiment? So at first you have this uncertainty, and uncertainty is something that you want to solve, right? Does somebody really care if, does a customer care if they can click on this box and it does this feature, right? Do they care? So you have that uncertainty, then you define a really quick test, a way that you can test that. So we're just going to make a mock-up, or we're going to put a wireframe out there, or we're going to put a landing page out there. We're going to add a feature to an application that's not going to do anything, but we're actually just going to be able to track if they click on it or something like that. Is that experiment with that prototype that you can then run for that week and see what happens, right? Do people click on it? Does it increase engagement? Does it increase throughput? You know, whatever it is that your criteria is, it has to be, you know, something that's measurable and something that's well defined. And then afterwards, you have to have a postmortem. You have to understand why it worked, why it didn't work, so that that way you can feed into that next experiment. You can have multiple experiments for one defined uncertainty. So just because you have an experiment, you can have a whole bunch of experiments around that uncertainty. And as you continue to refine your experiments, you're going to continue to have a better understanding of what that uncertainty is. And ultimately what you're doing is your uncertainties are a bunch of guesses. And what you're going to learn is that some of your guesses are going to be completely wrong, and you're going to realize that they are guesses. And some of your guesses you're going to realize are completely right, and they are now facts. And then that's what you're going to continue to build your application to. We've created these leap of faith assumptions. And so these assumptions, these leap of faith assumptions, are things, essentially they're guesses, right? They're those guesses, there's those uncertainties. But the idea here is it's a big deal, and it's really what you're basing the value of your product off of. Meaning, if you get it wrong, the value of whatever you're building is zero, right? So you've created these leap of faith assumptions, which are driving your uncertainties, which are creating experiments around, which you're then ultimately going to fit into this business model canvas. And what this business model canvas is, it's a way of visually understanding, do you actually have a business here? And so what these kind of sectors do is they break up your, what you're trying to, your uncertainties, let's put it that way, into areas of desirability, meaning does your customer want it? Feasibility, meaning can you build it? And viability, meaning will people actually pay for it for the most part? So you've created these quadrants or these sectors that have uncertainties with experiments and results, and they all sort of fit under these little buckets. And the idea, the way that we worked this at the Growth Accelerator is we had this plotted on a massive sheet of paper with a bunch of Post-it notes. And it gave us the ability to then take a step back and really try to understand what experiments we needed to run to solve what uncertainties so that we could have the best business outcome for our model. So from there, you've run your experiments, and your experiments can actually include prototypes. So many of them do, right? One of the things that I'm showing here, prototypes can come in a variety of different ways. It could be a hand-drawn chart like we're showing here on the left, which is actually something that we just released for this COVID pandemic. We decided we wanted to use our data to help organizations predict what materials they would need to keep their ventilators running. And we realized, hey, we can do this with our data. So we quickly drew up a few hand drawings. We had some voice of the customer calls, figured out, if we could deliver you something like this, is it actually valuable to you? Found out it certainly was. And so our final solution, which we built in about a week and a half, is vastly different from this first prototype. But this is what got people thinking about what could be done and helped us to find what that was. We launched that, and we've had a bunch of use of it so far, which has been pretty cool. Next thing I'm showing is you can certainly show software workflows in paper, right? There's also other tools like InVision that we've used to do that as well, but it could be a very, very simple prototype. And I'm running out of time, so I got to really speed it up here. And then observing the product. So like I said, spend a lot of time out at customer visits. We've also used a bunch of other tools. I'm sure you use all kinds of tools to help measure. I'm a fan of Full Story. I think it's pretty neat how it allows you to record essentially sessions of people using your software. So you could really see where people get hung up, what features they use, what features they don't use, etc. And then, like I said before, we're really starting with a minimum viable product. Donuts an interesting example, right? Because everybody likes donuts. Well, I guess not everybody likes donuts, but if you spend your time building out this final product, you're investing a lot of money and time, and somebody may not like it. When basically, a donut is essentially fried dough, and that's your minimum viable product because people will eat it, and then you can learn. Great. What on top of that? What should we do? What should we put on top of that fried dough? Oh, we could put glaze, we could put frosting, we could put sprinkles, and ultimately you start building out what that final product looks like. But you're doing it based upon what your customer is telling you, not what you think, and therefore you're not investing time and money in things that may not be valuable. And measuring results. So Eric Ries talks a lot about vanity metrics, and I totally agree with him here. The idea of a vanity metric, and you see a lot of marketing organizations might go by, page views, time on site, trial signups, but really those don't mean anything because they're not actionable. So what if somebody hit your page? They're not doing anything. They're not sharing it. They're not actively engaging with it. Or, hey, we had 1,000 signups of our application. So what? They signed up, they used it once, or they may not even signed up. You really need to understand how people are actually using your application. So when you're creating metrics to measure yourself against, you need to make sure that they're actionable. So these are just a few things. Now, what we've done at Accruent, we started trying to build this application, which was ultimately a way of helping hospitals understand equipment reliability of their biomedical devices before they bought them. So biomedical devices, you think about anything that's around the bedside at a hospital, a medicine delivery pump, a ventilator, respirator, a CT scanner, MRI machine. Those are all biomedical devices. And today there's no way, or prior to our data insights platform, there's really no way for a hospital to understand equipment reliability prior to making that purchase. So we started out with wireframes back in May, when we started sharing this with prospects. We got a lot of feedback and built an MVP, which is essentially 4 metrics that we delivered about a month later. And then 2 weeks after that, had our first PO, and we've used wireframing to drastically accelerate our speed. This is from a product called Envision, which I think is pretty neat. We created this business model canvas, like I showed you earlier, where we populated all of our experiments. This is just a small subset of the experiments that we've run, and we continue to run experiments. We continue to put them on the business model canvas to ensure that we're hitting all sections of the canvas as we're trying to decide what experiments to run to solve what uncertainties. And then ultimately what we've built, we launched the first product in June. We've had our 4th major product release with lots of iterations in between. And ultimately what we started out building was a tool that helped, like I said, organizations understand the reliability of their equipment prior to purchase. And what it sort of morphed into as well is including things like benchmarking to understand the maintenance of the performance of the maintenance organizations. We've added a lot of capital planning features to help organizations understand, do they have equipment that's going to need to be replaced? We're predicting future parts and materials needs to help them optimize their capital budgets for the next 3 to 5 years. We're helping them plan their labor effectively. And these are all features that were not part of an MVP, but by delivering the tool that we delivered and getting it in front of the customers and starting to ask questions and understand what their challenges were and where we could address it, they were features that we've added and just to continue to increase value of the application. And so that's my talk. I know I went really fast and I covered a lot, and if anybody wants to reach out, feel free. michael.burrell@utexas.edu, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk anything, product development, startups, flying, you name it, anything outdoors. That's it. Appreciate y'all's audience.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, definitely pick his brain. I think it was fun for me to talk to him about this. What he's put in the presentation is a lot of good stuff here. Let's get ready with your slides, by the way. I would say definitely Gemba is something we hear a lot of, which is the place of work. So you always want to go to the place of work where the customer is actually operating their work, so you can kind of learn from them. And I think that's what Michael got to do a lot of in this, and then he learned a lot from. And it's kind of neat that the output of this was something that is actually helping healthcare people figure out, when to request a new ventilator. So it's very appropriate for what's going on in the pandemic, and it's something that Acronia has given up for free. So very cool project. Les, I want to turn it over to you. So feel free to present. I think Michael stopped presenting. Thank you so much again, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Michael, before you start, sorry, just a reminder here to use the channel to ask questions. If you had anything for Michael that you didn't quite, you wanted him to elaborate a little bit more, the Slack channel is the way to go. If you happen to put it in the Zoom channel, that's fine. We'll still get to it. But sorry, Les, feel free to start now.
No worries. So first off, I just wanted to thank Mark and the ProductTank team for this topic tonight. I've been completely amazed just by the relative few resources out there that deal specifically with useful frameworks for making bets or decision-making in terms of roadmaps. And that extends into marketing and sales plans as well. The other thing, and it's strange to me that that's the case, because I think product is being asked to do that much more frequently because the pace of business has and probably will continue to speed up, right? Agile has turned more into, waterfall's turned into Agile, and of course, continuous deployment and everything else is coming faster. And things like assumptions and bets are shortcuts that allow you to be able to make movement quickly without having all the facts, right? And that's kind of you have to take a leap of faith at some point. Another disclaimer that I want to state is the entirety of my 18-year product career has been in healthcare information technology, which means you will have to suffer through some of those type of product examples. After COVID, I think this is probably not a huge barrier, but I wanted to mention it just in case. So product bets. And the title here I have is Assumption Guidance. And I choose assumption and the word assumption for one simple reason. I believe bets, leaps, hypotheses, these are all the same thing as an assumption, right? So tonight, my presentation is really going to be a couple of case studies that introduce certain guidance tips that I've come to rely on when it comes to specifically the decision-making capability of product and as it relates to making assumptions or making bets. And these can be regarding growth strategies, markets, large product decisions that impact a company greatly, on to just how you prioritize maybe the backlog. The first case study I want to start with is a digital health startup company. At the time before this assumption was made, they had two markets that were being used. The first was insurance groups, so payers, Humana, Cigna, things like that, where they were a mobile tool used to be able to take data from the payer and send it to the patient, right? People have a lot of questions regarding their deductibles and out-of-pockets and things like that. And the second second market was self-insured employers. These are folks like Walmart and so forth that offer insurance to their employees and wanted a tool to be able to help with wellness programs and things like that. And as the company was moving forward, there was a thought to say, well, okay, this is a typical thing when it comes to startup. Should we unlock more segments in this market? We've gotten the SMB market maybe in those segments, but should we go higher? And to go higher means we need to, there's additional gaps that we need to build within the feature, but we can kind of cement and put all of our bets on the table within sort of the self-insured employer market. Or should we move to a new market? And you would think that, and this big of a decision would take, you'd have a lot of time to be able to make it, but that's not usually the case when it comes to these decisions, that there is a definite time frame. You need to start considering how you're going to make this move. And so in this case, for example, the decision was, an assumption was, let's move to the healthcare market and dealing with hospitals and clinics and so forth. And as we did a little bit of that work, what we realized is around hospitals, there is this huge fat layer of technology that's called health information technology, EHRs. And this is what's used in hospitals to run orders, to take claims, all of this stuff, all the features that you would expect to use within a hospital setting. And then outside of that, you had this new layer of technology called patient portals. And these are web-based technologies that hospitals were leveraging to allow patients to log into a portal on the internet and the web and schedule appointments, get lab results, and so forth. And so what we decided is, based upon this dynamic, we felt like the assumption is that there's probably the need for an even thinner technology layer, that patients, and in particular those that are trying to understand their healthcare better, don't want to log into a web portal. They want to log into an app, possibly. And so this assumption was something that we had to test using experiments and data, but we didn't have all the data points we necessarily needed. The story here that we started concocting was this idea that healthcare was really being redefined, we felt like. And in this case, the patient and provider relationship, how you interact with your doctor, was moving from this fixed and finite and functional type of relationship to one that was more fast and fluid and flexible. And our assumption was, if we could provide some speed and flexibility to offer to a facility or healthcare organization in a way to help engage with their patients, that we would find success. But again, this was something that maybe took 2 weeks of time, right? And it was a pretty big decision, and it altered the roadmap very significantly in terms of the features that would be needed. So this kind of brings us to the first of these guidance tools regarding assumptions. And first is just to establish, if you are in a position of coming up with bets and appetites, you need to understand the context you're operating in. In this case, you need to have a frank discussion with your executive team. What is their comfort level with making product assumptions? There are some risk-adverse companies today, and even though they may be digital technology companies or whatever, and call themselves innovative, innovation is something that requires a bit of risk, and it requires an appetite for that risk. And you should know sort of the company that you're dealing with. If you are the type that you are working on assumptions that are big and don't necessarily have all the data points needed, you're gonna have to fight the fight with your board and fight the fight with the senior leadership team. And fighting that fight along with all of the work that needs to go into proving that your assumption is correct and then acting on it is going to definitely be taxing for you. So just kind of set the stage, figure out where they are. The second is, I would say, the creating of a counterfeit reality. And really what I mean here is that anytime you make an assumption, a product assumption, a bet, you're really leaving reality for some sort of mental creation of your own doing. And this augmented reality allows you to synthesize data, to take in sort of this world where, what do people really want? What do I believe based upon the data that I'm looking at? Does this make sense? And the clearer that you can form that picture, the easier it's going to be for you to communicate the assumptions that are within that sort of world to product marketing, to the technology team, to senior leadership. And this requires a great deal of synthesis, because synthesis helps distill down all these different data points that you're receiving through technology trends and market research, and of course some of the evidence and data points coming out of the user research experiments. And it allows you to be able to create this organization, really reduce all this down and form a clear picture. And I mention this because I don't feel like it's something that people talk enough about. I feel like a lot of times it's stigmatized to make assumptions. And while I think it's important not to die of a suicide or anything like that, I think it's equally important for your products to remain relevant, which means that you have to have some notion of innovation, which means you have to have some idea of something new, which doesn't exist. And to do that, you need to be able to be very clear about how you communicate. The third piece here, I think, is to align with the economy. That whatever you decide to build, your assumptions, your bets, they need to be based within the context of what is currently valued and what's scarce. And so today, for example, a lot of people say that we're in a connection economy, which means simply that your assumptions and your bets, whatever your features or your product is meant to do, should connect. It should provide some connection of some kind, whether you're connecting individuals with individuals, you're connecting businesses and offerings with individuals, whatever that case is. In our case, at Be Well, it's connecting individuals with their own healthcare and finding the best way to be able to leverage gamification and other methods to be able to break down some of that verbiage and data into more context-driven, helpful hints throughout the day. My second case study is really around smaller bets. So these are the ones that you deal with that are going to be on a level that is prioritizing features and epics. These could be really large or small. But in this case, this is a company I worked for, which was an electronic health record for home health. And so these are for nurses and those folks that are going out to people's homes in their cars, and they're taking care of individuals that are homebound. So they're not sick enough to be in the hospital, but they're not well enough to be able to get to an appointment. And so this company began as a disruptor. I'll point that out because it causes some issues a little bit later. They were first to market with a web-based solution. At the time, the market was just client server. And so they offered a new flexibility in terms of the price point and all of that that allowed them to gain market share of around 40% in around 8 years. And at that 8-year point, they were looking to try to break into the enterprise segments within home care. So these are the large enterprise companies that have a multitude of locations all around the country. At the time, their ARR was around 30 million, and they've over the last at least 3 to 4 years prior to this, they had 30% year-over-year growth. And so some of the challenges that occurred within that company were regarding some of the, what should we do, right? How should we prioritize and what bets do we want to make? Either bringing on a new team and what should they work on, whatever the case is. And so a number of these came up from clients. I distilled them down to 2 because at the end, in this case, it really was 2 different bets that we were looking to make. And one of those bets was based off of our user data. So this is asking users what they want, surveys, user groups, all of that, along with looking at competition and seeing what features they were building and trying to understand how the market was accepting those features. But they were workflow based. They were essentially tying elements within the system and features to allow a better user experience within the application. And that sounded like a great bet and a pretty safe bet. And we felt like, even though it was going to take around, in this case, 4 or 5 sprints to do it, it was going to allow us to take that story to a different segment of the market and be able to capitalize off of it. The second one came about from data that was exposed during the win-loss. So reviewing win-loss data, a large theme that came up was that we didn't offer an offline solution. So it's the case sometimes that you get to a place, a residence, a house, and you don't have internet connectivity. And because our system was web-based, the thought was, well, we are afraid that we're going to be in an area like Wyoming, or whatever the case is, and we're afraid we're not going to have access to it. And so we don't think we're going to buy. And that brings me to this point where we talk about data-driven, and it's important to be data-driven. A lot of times we don't necessarily specify which data. So we have lots of data sources now, and I think as product operations and that field continues to grow, we're going to have a good bit more, other than Salesforce and of course in the feature experiments and Google Analytics, Mixpanel. There's a number of different places where we're getting data that shows the abandon rate, the click-through rate, looking where they're spending time. Of course, there's data coming in from experiments. So in this case, maybe putting an experiment that would be an application to show if they've gone offline and if they were interested in continuing to have access. And what the data showed in this case was the win-loss showed that that B, in this case, the offline need was occurring much more frequently. It was cited as a reason why we were losing deals. Whereas all the experiments that the user experience team was putting together showed that, that the folks that were interested in offline occurred less than 5% of the time. And that's typically not a number. Once something hits 5% of the time, it falls off of the MVP status and it's relegated to the backlog if they're at all. And additionally, our current clients preferred the new workflow of 5-to-1 over an offline solution. In this case, it was decided to go with A, and it did no difference in terms of our sales. Our sales didn't pick up, and after 2 quarters of it being out of the market, the success metric that we had envisioned for that feature and bringing in an additional 10% revenue based on some deals that we had did not occur. And I believe it didn't occur because even though it's not logical, the fact that people are scared that they're not going to have access, even though it occurs very, very rarely, and of course the pace of internet connectivity is only going to get better, right? It's not going to get worse. And but all those things didn't matter. And it just goes to show that some of the data that you follow, that there's not necessarily a best practice, that all these things and that are in books that talk about, oh, well, if this is the case, you don't necessarily go in this direction. That doesn't necessarily have to be true. And in healthcare, we have this concept called evidence-based practice. And this is a bit different than best practices. So if you take 2 medications, for example, that treat a condition, I don't know, the flu, and in this, the lab, medicine A is twice as effective as B, then that becomes sort of the best practice for physicians to give medicine A. But there are many times after both medicines are on the market that B actually correlates to better outcomes for patients. And the reason why has nothing to do with the lab. It has to do with the fact that pill A is huge and you have to take it 5 times a day, and kids just aren't doing it, so they're not compliant. And B is 1 pill that's chewable and tastes like, strawberries, and you only take it once a day. So even though it's half as effective, it's actually being taken, and so therefore you're having good results. And when it comes to being data-driven regarding bets and assumptions, you need to be careful of following a best practice. All assumptions need to have some data to back them up. Otherwise, you are committing a suicide. But how and which data that you choose definitely needs to be thought through versus just following a sort of recipe book. This next bet, I think it was very stigmatizing to me. And first, it was a web-based electronic health records for hospitals. And again, sorry for the healthcare specific items. But this company was facing increasing competition, losing market share for the last 2 years, but revenue was still growing at 10%. And that was fueled by new regulations that offered incentives for hospitals to buy software. And the assumption made at the time by the product leader was to build a product for a certain segment of hospitals called critical access hospitals. And these are hospitals that exist 25 miles away from the nearest hospital. So they're always out in the middle of nowhere. And they're called critical access, and they're funded because the idea is that there's not enough money to necessitate having a hospital. So state governments and local communities will fund a hospital, even if it's losing money, so that they can actually have a hospital in their small rural area. And so this decision was a very strange one to make, the way that it happened, because the assumption was made, it was unveiled in a meeting that we would be working towards this goal. And as we asked for data points regarding that assumption, the data points didn't add up. And during the meeting, it became very uncomfortable to voice your opinion regarding the assumption. And of course, we made the move to the critical access market. It failed completely. It had everything to do with the fact that some of the data points that we had concerns about earlier were in fact true, that these hospitals were funded by the community. And our big value prop was that you could be more efficient with software and therefore need less people. And once the community heard that jobs were being lost, of course, that these deals never materialized. And the strange thing is that we knew this up front, but the product leadership felt like, no, this is a good bet. And that along with a number of research that I've done since then has uncovered a set of other tips and guidance tips regarding assumptions. And the first is to ensure true diversity. A lot of people forget that innovation occurs at the intersection of human interaction, that you have an idea, and that idea is then shared with somebody else, and based on the reactions, nonverbal or verbal, of that individual, their thoughts of saying, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, I wonder if it were red, if it were different, or whatever the case is. And you, now that idea is slightly shaped, and then you tell it to someone else, and lo and behold, that idea now takes the shape of the different people you've interacted with, and it becomes something that's truly innovative and something that a market sees as novel. Now, these best assumptions come about when they're talked about and reformed by the input from others. So when you set the table of who you're interacting with, we talk about diversity in terms of skin deep, right? The race or even gender representation of diversity. But I'm talking about something that's much deeper than this, something along the motivation, that there are frameworks out there that people feel and think and react and are motivated in different ways. And it's important that you set the table within the product team of talking through bets and assumptions with people that think differently than you do. One such personality framework that I've used a good bit is called the Enneagram. And over the last probably 18 months, I've interviewed around 80 people. These are all product managers, product marketers, or product owners within Austin, a little bit without, to uncover kind of how they think, how their personality shapes how they make decisions, how they prioritize, and of course, how they think about assumptions. And there's some interesting facts that have come from this. First is that there's a large segment of the population, which are the achievers here, and these folks will always prioritize efficiency 70% of the time, meaning that if they come across assumptions, and one assumption is to offer something new versus enhancing or making an existing feature much more efficient, they're 70% more likely to go with the efficient option. And at the same time, there are some folks that are able to list out concerns twice as fast as others. And that brings me to sort of the next key, and that is when it comes to assumptions, we talk about data, data of coming in from Mixpanel and of course Salesforce and whatnot. We talk about that, but we don't necessarily talk about the doubts that occur. So when you have a great idea, and this is where things fall off the rails sometimes, the biases of competence bias, for example, you have this great idea and great assumption and great bet that you want to make. And right now, we prize people that are optimistic. And we prize people that smile a lot and agree with what our ideas are. And in that case, for example, we sort of don't look at real truth tellers when it comes to ideas. And so one of this I picked up from a study that was conducted, and it's been used in businesses, is this idea of a pre-mortem, which is before you make the decision to pull the trigger on your bet, right? You've done some experiments and you invested some amount of money, but there's now time to actually lay down the code, get the teams engaged, and actually spend some time acting on this and aligning marketing and everything else. Before you pull that trigger, to offer a meeting, to have this meeting called a pre-mortem. And during that meeting, the instructions are very clear. You simply say, imagine we're a year into the future, we've implemented this idea, and the outcome was a disaster. And take 5 to 10 minutes and write why that occurred, or why could it have occurred. And what this does really is it takes those individuals that are able to take, to look at an idea and instantly come up with reasons why it may not succeed. And rather than those people being stigmatized as being downers for the team and so forth, it legitimizes their doubts in a period where it's most needed. And this actually was one of the reasons why the Coke Pepsi challenge thing and that debacle occurred, is that Coke actually did this. They held taste trials and they held user groups and asked individuals what they thought. And the information came clear. There was a high likelihood that the folks that enjoyed Coke would turn against the brand if they changed. And again, this was not legitimized. And of course, it was just seen as, oh, those people just aren't on board. Let's move forward. This is very dangerous. If you are the type to act upon something and not really want feedback or concerns regarding how it could fail, your decisions and your assumptions could definitely fall. I just want to mention that the time when that individual did make that decision to move forward with the product bet of going to the critical access market, I did voice some concerns. And what I was thrown was this book, Emotional Intelligence. And I don't know about you guys, but I mean, there's definitely great things in this book, but I've seen it more oftenly used as a hammer to beat people into submission and agreeance with whatever idea you're throwing at them. And so at this point, there is, for some reason, the needle has moved to everyone needs to smile and everyone needs to agree in this sort of positivist culture regarding risk versus, being more negative or concerning. I think there is a neutral ground that's being missed here. And the last tip that I have regarding assumptions is this idea that there's no best practice when it comes to it. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to taking risk and making bets and assumptions. And there are times when you think this is something that needs to be done in a meeting, and really the complexity of sifting through all the data points of all the inputs coming in from the research that you've conducted and the experiments that you've put into the application, that complexity is best served through a very unstructured meeting in front of an empty whiteboard. And I know Mark's given a talk on whiteboarding before. I've given that talk just as recent as last week to our Product Job Club. And I'm telling you, it is, a lot of people frown upon doing this because meetings need to have a clear agenda. They need to be small and short. But in these meetings where you're coming to a decision on looking at all this data, it's best served in front of an empty wall. Hours later, it looks like not much has been done, but you've taken a huge step in sense making of that data that allows you to then leave and come away with a great sense of understanding regarding the assumption or the bet that you're about to make. And that's it. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate that presentation. Well thought out. Lots there. I think we'll get some good questions in and share. Mark is ready to go. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I am raring. Okay, cool. How's my hair? Is anybody else's hair like growing incredibly long? This has been driving me crazy as of late. Okay, so my topic is consistently making smart product decisions. It's the best title I could come up with. Okay, so I'm Mark Stephan. I'm one of the ProductTank organizers. I'm ProductHired Job Club organizer. I'm founder of ProductHired. Do a lot of things. And I also, my day job is director of the knowledge program at Broadway Technology. So what I'm going to talk about, you should know some of my background. So this is my background. You can just look at the logos. But, I've done quite a lot here. But one of the things I try to help people is I mentor a lot of people in product, a lot of people in the Bay, not just in Austin. And after doing this for probably about, 8 years, I've kind of come to a hypothesis that there's a problem with most product people. And maybe you're one of these people that has this problem. They're busy. And somewhere along the road, somewhere in history, we started measuring ourselves on how busy we are and not the impact we make. And immediately when I say that statement, yeah, you're going to agree to me. Anybody would be insane not to agree with me. But just think about yourself. If somebody says, hey, you want to go do something, you immediately respond with, sorry, I'm busy. And if you're like me, you're probably most of the time, you're just, no, you're not. It's just your knee-jerk reaction. We are busy people. And for some reason, our culture values us to be busy. And quite frankly, if you truly are busy, this is killing you. This is killing your creativity and how you think. And ultimately, I think that will be why your product is probably going to be killed as well. So let's dig into this. So we have the product life cycle, right? And whether you're a product manager or a designer or data science, you probably have something along this product life cycle that you're supposed to be working on and measuring. And in fact, some people's entire jobs is to create more and more things under each segment. It's their jobs to create your work. And the whole point of this slide is to show you that, yeah, if you try to do everything, you are going to be busy. You're going to be working 14, 18 hours a week and producing nothing. There's plenty of work to do in product. But stop. Take a breath, right? And ask yourself this simple question. At this moment, what is the simplest and easiest thing I can do to have the biggest impact towards my goal? So I think this is fundamentally a very simple prioritization question that we all neglect to do. We get caught up in the big story and having to do things or into the details, but we don't realize that prioritization is our friend. And even though when we're in interviews and they ask us to prioritize something, we can do it. We really are bad at prioritizing in real life. And so my story is about that. The story of a simple $3 million decision, okay? So this is a story from something I did at the company TopTal. If you don't already know, TopTal is a two-sided marketplace. They have talent and they have companies who want to hire talent. And TopTal is the middle person who's a professional concierge who's matching them with developers, designers, product people, and so on and so forth to build teams. And then they charge a whole lot of money for that. So at TopTal, I was an individual contributor. I was a senior product manager leading the entire client experience. From the moment they signed the form that they were interested, all the way through onboarding and everything. I was in charge. It was quite a lot for a senior product manager. And I just kind of spent some time today counting the products. And I usually tell people I did 4, but I realized that actually I probably did more like, 6 or 10 or whatever, because everything's a minor product. So I did onboarding. We completely redesigned the client experience and relaunched it. I created ways to connect talent matchers with clients and client services matching and phone calls and things. I built an iOS application, built 2 Slack bots. One was for the clients to match with talent. The other one was internally for us to get talent matchers to quickly connect with clients and connect them with talent matchers. And I was in charge of referrals. And the reason I wanted to show you this, because as an individual working in a company, yeah, I probably could have been very busy running, multiples of products, having each product had teams, designers, lots of developers, and it could have been quite a lot. What I did when I got into TopTal, when I realized that I had all this to do, is I wanted to get really a big perspective and get the lay of the land, right? And it doesn't matter if you're starting a company or you've been there for 10 years, perhaps you should just do this, like stop, take a breath, and just look around for a moment. And so at TopTal, I asked, what is the overall goal here? What is TopTal's purpose? And what is it that would really truly matter for me to change in this business? You notice I didn't ask about my products yet, right? I asked just overall. I asked, how is that measured? Like, how do they measure these numbers? And then I asked, what are the levers I possess that I control that could trigger these things? And then I asked, what is the easiest thing I could do to pull that lever, right? So instead of coming up with great, ambitious, huge, I thought of what's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit I could do. So I created a hypothesis. Could it be, after looking around at the products, I took interest in referrals, right? Because there's a whole bunch of products there, and by the way, I had to do them all, right? But I'm like, if I'm going to make my mark at TopTal, I want to find out which product is it that can have the biggest impact. And so I triggered on referrals, and there's a few reasons. So at TopTal, referrals work by $100 for every talent who you refer, who gets accepted and gets a gig. So like, bang, invite all your friends. It's a great deal, frankly, right? And then this was great, $2,000 for every employer who you refer who hires a talent for 2 weeks or more, which means they didn't fire them within 2 weeks. I mean, when I saw this referral program, I was like, awesome, where can I invite all my friends, right? And so, but when I looked at the data, there wasn't a lot of people using that. They weren't taking advantage of this $2,000. I was like, if I could give you $2,000, I could imagine most of you would do almost anything, right? So why weren't people doing this? Less than 20 users of thousands every month went to the referral page. So like 20 users of thousands. I'm like, that's sad and pathetic. Why is that? I mean, I would dig through a site to find $2,000. And of those users, very few even shared the referral link. This was interesting to me. I was like, what's going on? So I was like, what the? There we go. I went to the referral page. This is the referral page, mostly. Yeah, I think this is it, right? I had to dig up all my old TopTal secret files. And so I looked at this page, and just so you know, you could scroll this page. It's probably 6 pages long, no joke. It's just like 6 pages in length. And I was like, what the? And then if you look on this column over here, the referral link is way, go to the very bottom. That's where the referral button is. So if you go all the way to the referral button, you click that, you get to this page. And I was like, what? So I was like, how could I fix that? And so I came up with some ideas, right? I did some brainstorming, diverged, right? I said, I could create a lot of marketing and advertising. So I could talk to the marketing team. We could send out newsletters, maybe some more links, more graphics and our blogs, right? We could do that. I could change the referral sentence. Maybe $2,000 isn't enough. Maybe it should be $10,000, right? Okay, then we need to figure out, you know, if it's revenue positive, is that going to make us money? You know, we need to talk to finance. So I need to pull a whole bunch of people in that. Or maybe, you know, feedback loops. So users, you know, maybe we should say, if you share this link, who clicked it? Did they sign up? Did they actually complete the tasks of hiring someone or getting accepted? Maybe that's it. People just need to see the impact of their links. Or maybe integrate the referral links into blogs. So maybe people don't like sharing links because it's impersonal. Maybe you'll share a blog article that has the link. So it's more like you're sharing information and, oh, by the way, click TopTal, right? So I probably had, I'm sure I had probably 50 or so ideas, you know, and so I was looking through these and I was like, okay, what's the simplest thing I could do to make the biggest impact? And so I came up with ideas. I was thinking, you know, and by the way, this doesn't happen magically. You bake on this a little bit. You got to think about it, right? And I think I came up with this idea probably 3 months into TopTal. And then this was my idea. I had a hypothesis. Perhaps, just perhaps, this page is too confusing and too overwhelming. I mean, I don't even know what to do on it. Too much information makes me think, why should I bother? What if the users think that too? So this is my hypothesis. So what if I simplified this page? However, you know, being a good data guy, how could I easily simplify this page and keep the exact same functionality and just be able to test the hypothesis of overwhelming? You know, is that the problem? I don't want to change something else and dirty the data. So this is what I did. I introduced an accordion button. Okay, ignore these lovely share buttons. That was a second iteration. I didn't have the original one. But essentially, I kept the same here, and I put more ways to share, which opened up that 6 pages of stuff. Simple. Yeah, I just hid the damn information, right? So when you come to this page, it's clean. It's very clean, right? So let's see what the A/B testing said about my accordion hypothesis. 60% click-through increase. Wow, that's amazing. An accordion button, hiding crap, improvement of clicking, and it was 60% sharing. So they shared. That's amazing. Right? Wow, okay. So let's try this again, right? So what could I do next? So it seems it might have been overwhelming. So what could I do? So again, I have my options. Now, how can we improve this? We can create marketing and advertising, referral incentives, feedback loops, integrate referral links, make it more simple, perhaps. So ideas, we're rumbling, we're diverging. And hypothesis. Perhaps, just perhaps, this page is too, still, okay, my grammar, I wrote this today. Still too confusing and not action-oriented enough. What if we simplify this and make it possible to not click the share button? Like make it like really the only damn button you can click on there. And this is what we got. Simplicity. I simplified it, all the information, and literally every button you click here will share something, right? You can almost not click something. And so we introduced simplicity. So this, I was able to invest a little bit more time in this, and we did multivariate testing. So we still kept the original. We did my other test was still alive, and then we threw this up as a test. And the A/B testing revealed 40% through increase over everything else. So over the 60% or 40% more than that. So I think we got a winner. But okay, great. 40% click through, like sharing. What does that mean? Right? Great, people clicked a button more. How much is that? Revenue was the goal I was going after. So the hard part was causation. Working with the data science engineering team, I found ways to track. And this is really, quite frankly, the accordion menu took a day, right? Doing the data tracking took 3 months, just so you understand, because I wanted to prove causation. And it's really harder for referral links because they go out there into the wild, wild blue of the internet. And we wanted to track them when they came back in. We wanted to find companies on the web who click the link, when they enter the site, when they sign up, so they hit the site, right? Now, I don't want to know what they signed up, just when they landed on our site, when they signed up, when they went through onboarding and started looking for talent, when they found talent, when they hired talent and kept them. I wanted to know how much that referral link was worth. And later, not at this time, but I actually went further and figured out, okay, companies who were referred, did they refer other companies, and do they refer? So what's the tail on this? Okay, so I found out, yeah, we have causation. So we were able to show through multivariate testing that users who had simplified view had more sharing and client signups than those who did not. Per user who referred clients, their revenue increased 20%. So those who were referred, they spent 20% more. That equal to, and then we got more referrals. So it was actually better. Not only did we get new people, but they actually spent more. And just so you know, not in this study, but later when they referred people, they spent even more. So it's actually a growing trend. This equaled about $260,000 a month increase in revenue, which is about 3.1 million a year. And we made more adjustments which raised that revenue. So what's the time I spent on this? Let's go back to what is the ROI? How much effort did this really take me? So I actually estimated, right? So I had 6 or more products, and quite frankly, those took 95% of my time. Those were the products that stressed me out every day because the executives wanted those products done, even though they created no ROI. And so me as a product manager was really confused. Like, here is something that has value, and you have me working on something that doesn't have a lot of value. But of my time spent, probably 5% on this problem. On the other products, 95 didn't create revenue or any user satisfaction. And when I estimate the dev, design, and data science contributors, I will say that each one of them spent probably a max of a week full time on this problem over several months. Long term, like, this is not a lot of this is high ROI. $3 million, a few man hours for a week. Not bad at all. So this is what I want you to do. Think about what you're working on. And if you're a product person, Ask yourself, are you working on the right products in your company? Are you solving the right problems for those products? Are you trying to solve a hard problem that might have high impact? Or perhaps it's better to look for a lot more medium or small size problems that have high impact or medium impact, and doing those together quicker can have much more high impact in the long run. I find that's usually the case. I'm not saying don't take off big problems. Sometimes you need to, but don't assume every problem needs a big solution, right? Look for what is your accordion menu, right? I also, you should ask yourself, do you know what your goal truly is and how your products align for that goal? And every feature, everything you do every day, do you wake up and saying, is what I'm doing solving this goal, like going towards this goal? If it's not, you got a problem. And you're probably just creating busy work, to be honest. Have you and can you push back against leadership to work on the right things? So I will tell you, at TopTal, I couldn't. Everything I did was secret. And I proved it, and I got it done, and I made them $3 million. And when I showed it to them, they were impressed. And so I left that company. So, but let's look at product leaders. If you're a leader of product management or product managers, and this goes for designers, I mean, we all have these things that we're trying to solve. Are you letting your product teams do their job, right? Do they fully understand what impact is, right? Impact isn't making you happy. Impact is towards a particular goal, whether it's revenue or usually it's, ultimately it's always revenue. I mean, every company I go to, I try to tie what I do to revenue, simply because I try to say, hey, I am worth the money you spend on me. Please don't fire me. Yeah, I try to show that, right? And then are you telling them to find the easiest and most impactful thing to do? Again, I'm not saying easiest is always the way to go, but I will say it's definitely most often overlooked thing to do. Easy often works. And yeah, so you can reach out to me, mark@producthired.com, my LinkedIn, all these other things. And that's it. You can ask me Q&As later.
Yeah, please ask your Q&A. Sarathy is actually about to take over the presentation. The one takeaway I got from Mark's presentation is if you're going to leave a company, leave on a $3 million high note. That's the way to go. But thanks for that presentation. Sarathy, take it away. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to all these speakers for taking some time out of the day and sharing their insight. We are going to have a Q&A in a couple of minutes, but just one quick note before we kind of move to that. Actually, I'm not even sharing my screen, am I? Let me just bring this up here. All right, so just a couple of quick notes. So our next product in Austin, ProductTank event is going to be May 27th. Stay tuned for the details. We will have information on the topic and the, who's speaking and whatnot, but it'll be a similar format to today. It's very unlikely that we'll be able to do something in person next month. So we're planning for another Zoom hangout like we're doing here today. So stay tuned for details. Follow the Austin Events channel on Slack, or just get the updates on Meetup if you've joined the group already. And yeah, thanks again for joining us. We want to thank the sponsors, Accruent and ProductHired, and of course the speakers and all of you for taking time to join us and learn together. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a little time to do some Q&A. We have some questions for the speakers. I think the way we'll do it is we have some questions. I'll direct it to a specific speaker, and after the person answers it, if the other speakers want to share their insight as well, we'll give them a chance to speak. So please make sure you send your questions in the Slack channel. That's where we're handling it on the MTG chat channel. So we'll start the Q&A now, but please feel free to add more questions in. We'll pick them up as they come in.
And speakers, feel free to share your video and unmute, because this is basically for your answers.
All right, so the first question I have actually is for Michael. So one question we got was that you mentioned the concept of an accelerator. I was wondering whether this was part of Accruent's way of working since the company started, or whether it was introduced more recently. And if the latter, what's been the biggest challenge in getting that change to take hold?
Yeah, so Accruent was bought by Fortive about a year and a half ago, and Fortive is the one who brought the idea of this growth accelerator to us. So my team was the first team to go through the growth accelerator at Fortive. Now, with that said, I mean, there had been other teams that had created, I wouldn't say an accelerator, but created innovation groups that had also kind of implemented similar principles as well beforehand. But for the most part, the idea of it being a formal accelerator is pretty new, and it's one of the things that Ford brought to us. As far as taking, or I guess one of the biggest challenges with having it continue to take effect or grow, or what have you, I think when we were part of this growth accelerator, it kind of gave us this opportunity to operate as an experiment in our own, and so we broke a lot of kind of the corporate rules, and that was per Fortive, right? They said knock down any barriers, and they would help if we needed to, and this was all the way up at the top level, like a C-suite person was running it. So it was pretty easy to get things done, what we needed to get done, and then once we came back under kind of the Accruent corporate umbrella, I wouldn't say that all went away, because I think they our exec management recognized the value in it, but we sort of started to fall a little bit under the way that Accruent's measured, and Fortive being a publicly traded company, everything's measured on revenue, right? And so a lot of our incentives sort of changed to really focus on revenue versus acceleration of product. So that was probably the biggest challenge there. I know that some other teams have had challenges where they, maybe the team that they had as part of this accelerator has gone away because maybe they were borrowed from other resources. So that's another challenge that a large kind of corporate accelerator has. But some of the things that they've done, which has been really beneficial, is they've actually provided independent funding for us as well. So I've had to essentially go and raise money from our corporate sponsor per se, just like I did trying to raise venture funding, and they funded us in that way. So it's kind of interesting. It's allowed us to hire. It's allowed us to bring on consultants. It's allowed us to do things that I didn't have the budget for beforehand. So it's kind of neat as well. But I think I answered your question probably more.
So I know you got questions for the others, but this one's kind of a follow-up with Michael, so maybe we can stay with him. Was the Growth Accelerator an internal initiative, or was it delivered or facilitated by another company? Curious because I work in the innovation industry. I want to understand the players in town.
Yeah, so our parent's based out of Seattle, and it was actually facilitated by Eric Ries's The Lean Company. And so they have what they call faculty members, and they are the ones that sort of created the curriculum, and they led us through. And it was I think it was a 12-week program where we were on site in Seattle three separate times in that 12-week program, facilitated by them with regular check-ins with them, as well as the Fortive leadership team. So that's who they used. I know there's another group called Innovators DNA based out of the Bay Area that also Fortive also uses as well. And I'm sure there's tons of others from a corporate standpoint.
Thank you. Mark or Les, I know the questions somewhat were a little bit more close to specific to Accruent, but do you guys have any thoughts or experiences that you want to share about accelerators within organizations?
I'll say they're gaining more and more speed. There was this sort of notion that you are a large company and then these smaller guys would disrupt you. And large companies would try to be hip and try to be innovative, but within that culture, it became incredibly hard because success is probably one of the barriers to innovation, because there's this tendency, this sucking sound for you to constantly try to do things the way that they've been done. And that takes you away from any original thought. And so only until recently, I feel like there's been text on this that has made its way into larger companies. Jeffrey Moore's book, Zone to Win, is one of those books where it kind of gives you this recipe. His books were mostly around, you know, crossing the chasm and whatnot, that were from the other side, that were teaching smaller companies how to disrupt larger ones. But then folks like Microsoft brought him in and it's like, tell us how we can protect against this. And this defensive strategy always, it has this key part in it. And one of those is to subdivide your company into 4 different areas. And one of those areas takes on the characteristics of an incubator or an accelerator. And at the same time, my son now is in 9th grade at high school, Vandergrift over here. And while I was there mentoring the robotics team, they kind of said, hey, you have a business background. Why don't you help mentor this incubator program that we have at this high school? And I thought that was very interesting too. So there's been a curriculum that's been established by companies and then lent out to certain high schools within the country. And it's strangely familiar, right? You know, for what I've learned in the MBA days and during my time at Arizona State getting an innovation degree. So I would say it's on the rise.
Great, thanks. Mark, anything you want to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. So it's not a new thought. Back in 2000, I worked at a company, Trilogy Software, and they had a thing slightly different but similar called Trilogy University. And so college grads who would enter a company have 3 months where they come up to solve problems. And they actually, many new products would come out of that. And I currently work at Broadway Technology, and we have a very, actually just ripped it off a Trilogy. They call it dojos. And it's the same concept. They talk about, give all the college students problems. They come up with products or solutions. And, you know, if it's good, then they keep on working on it. If it's not, then they get assigned it to the company. And so it's a different type of incubator. It's one where we take advantage of new ideas and fresh thought by bringing them in and throwing them problems. But I think, yeah, I mean, large companies have always been trying to find ways to be agile while having the advantage of having size. And it's not an easy problem to have, and some companies do it well and some don't. But I think most large companies, I don't know about HomeAway, but I know Indeed has their innovation labs, and several other companies here in town also have them.
Great, thanks a lot for that feedback. We're going to move on to the next question. Les, we have a question for you, actually. So a question was asked was, where did you get the framework to test your assumptions?
You know, it came about from a good bit of failure, number one. Making decisions is, if you're not in healthcare, not that any app, you know, it's fine to have mistakes, but healthcare is a mission critical app. And so there's a lot of times, there's a lot of tension around, if this isn't bulletproof, there's a significant amount of pain that's going to cause us and the client. And you remember those times, right? At the same time, I think going outside of the norm and doing a lot of interviews really was the piece, right? I saw tendencies of folks and how they were motivated and how those motivations played out in the decisions they made in product roles in and around product was very just interesting to me, and it continues to be. So interviewing folks, understanding kind of why they do that allowed me to be able to hone in on some of those pieces, right? So Mark's, you know, his accordion button, for example, you know, there's elements there that just ring itself out in all the research that I've done. One of those is this incubation period. And I termed it as sort of this counterfeit reality, but it's this period where you let the information just sink in there. And just like books, like Daniel Pink has one on how people are motivated and what motivates them, and this period of thinking through things without tension allows you to be more creative and exploring options. And then also the removal of barriers or constraints. In his case, it was, the page doesn't have to look this way. And I felt like all assumptions and all of that's come about from the removal of barriers. And I feel like it's the same way in transformation, right? As products transform in companies, or if you're part of a product organization or in a position of leading one, and you want transformation, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking transformation is the same thing as growth, but they're very different. And in fact, opposites. Growth is the idea that you're taking on something new and you're growing, whereas transformation always involves something falling away, usually without your control. And sometimes that's constraints. And once you, I think, are aware of a lot of these decisions and how people make them, you start to understand themes. And that's where these 6 things came about.
Awesome, thank you very much. Michael or Mark, anything you want to share on your frameworks or how you've arrived and what's worked?
Yeah, I came up with my framework by listening to a bunch of people complain about their jobs. So and realize there's a correlation here between all their complaints. It's that they all think they're busy and they're all working on the wrong stuff. So
okay. Anything else, Michael, you want to share, or should we move on to the next question if there's nothing else to this one?
I think we're good. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just going to interject here real quick. I know I see a list of questions coming through. Just want to kind of make an announcement that based on time and the good conversations we're having and the presentations that we had, Mark kind of mentioned on the chat, we're going to forego the networking experiment we had and just kind of continue to have this time. So continue to ask questions. This will be the time for us to interact with one another. Go ahead, Stephan.
So we have one from Mark here. So Mark, what was the initial asking of the goals and checking the top tile about? Was it about the short term, the long term, or both?
okay, I heard half that question. I'm trying to read the rest. Where is it? What was it again? To say it again.
As far as the initial goals at top tile, and what was it focused on? Was it focused on short term, long term, or both?
Oh, well, good question. I mean, obviously short terms, there's always these goals, right? And there's spoken goals and then there's unspoken goals. And, I would like to say that they had all their ducks in a row and had, OKRs and, KPIs and all these measurements that they wanted you to hit. And the truth is they didn't have tons of those. And there was some problems there, to be truth. And that's one of the reasons why I just decided to figure it out myself. And of course, I will tell you, every company will appreciate it if you add to their revenue. Generally, not always. They'll be appreciative. Of course, there's methods, right? You need to do the right methods. But, short term, I will say, is all those other projects they had me working on, right? They gave me so many projects and they were short-term goals, make something prettier, make something good for marketing purposes. Like we spent a whole year and probably 60% of my time was on that iOS app. And literally, I'm not joking you, this is what frustrated me about it. It was because the CEO wanted an app to look cool. He just wanted an app to show people. No joke. And it took me a few months to figure that out because I was like, do clients really want this? And they didn't allow us to do user research, which frustrated me. So I couldn't ask clients. And so I had to go on the assumption that somebody wanted this mobile app. I wasn't told why. And eventually I was able to figure out, like, it's because the CEO wants one. Why not? So I made a pretty damn good iOS app. But that's a short-term goal. Like, there was no, there's no long-term sustainability to what the app's going to do, because quite frankly, no one's going to hire a $10,000 a month developer on a mobile app. I mean, who wants to do that? I don't want to do that. I want to think about it a little bit more than buying an Uber. It's a little bit different tactic. So I wanted to find something more long-term, more than just making something prettier. More, because again, does that add value to the company? Maybe in a way, right? Does it create user enjoyment? yeah, but that user enjoyment should add revenue at some point. There should be some data that points to revenue making the company overall better. And so I had multiple KPIs, definitely enjoyment. We did NPS. We did a bunch of other ways to figure out if users like things. I did guerrilla user research, AKA I didn't tell anyone. But at the end of the day, money saves. And that's what I was looking for. Which one of my products could I get that I could show a dollar sign? And that's what I went for.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the next question. We have a question for both Les and Michael.
We can't hear you.
Well, it's hard to hear you, but I can read this one that I think you were about to say. For Les and Michael, how do you avoid falling into the trap? And actually, I'm sure Mark has something to say about this one. How do you all avoid falling into the trap of customers wanting to make you happy and tell you what you want to hear? And the example there is you mentioned something about you were running some interviews, and they were told you that offline was less than 5% important, but then the win-loss actual data was telling you that it was very important. And so when you go out and do customer interviews, which is very important, how do you make sure that they're not telling you something just because they don't want to see you have a sad face when you leave?
Again, I feel like, I hate to say this, like it's broken record. I know folks like Sarathi who hear me at Product Job Club, this is repetitive, but I really believe we're getting to a point where product needs to overlay with design thinking and sort of how that changed, modernized product management. I really feel like personality, motivation frameworks are going to continue to do that because the world is moving more towards personalization. And you're looking towards the long tail, right? So what that's allowed me to do, at least in researching it and understanding how people react, is that there is a segment of the population that absolutely wants you to feel good, that they're motivated to relate with you, and that means tell you what you want to hear. If you are aware that that's happening, and there's not enough tension there for you to feel like you're not getting the full story, each personality type has a way to combat that, right? So if you are a music app company, for example, musicians, not all musicians, but they all fall under a certain personality. And that personality is highly creative. They do not like routine. And they're always authentic. And they prize authenticity above everything else. Knowing that allows you to ask a question that has authenticity at the heart of it, and they're going to answer that correctly, not in a way to just brush you off or give you an answer to leave them alone.
Yeah, my feedback is, nobody likes to tell you that your baby's ugly. So when you start presenting something to them, it's their natural reaction to be like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, this is great. But then I start asking the questions about, okay, great. How often would you use it? What problem does it solve? Who else on your team would be using this? And then ultimately, will you pay for it? I mean, I do have to phrase like the application that we built definitely hasn't sold like we expected to, just given what the initial reaction was before we actually, built it and started selling it. Because I think we did get caught in that trap of nobody wanting to tell you that your baby's ugly. But now, we're finding out who is accountable for, those decisions that it solves, talking with them, and then ultimately, asking more pointed questions, right? How often will you use this? What's the value that you're going to get out of it? Where do you not see value? And then, let's get a proposal over to you and see where that goes, right? So, yeah.
So my take on this, actually, both of these are really great. I think on that particular point, do understand different people make different decisions. There's the people who are they're the buyers, and then there's the people who are the evaluators. And the evaluators will buy anything because they don't actually spend money, and they probably don't even have the authority to say yes, right? And so understand who you're talking to. But there's tons of strategies. I built a product long ago, and I did exhaustive user research, and they all said that they would use it. And I built it. I spent a year building it, rolled it out, not one of them used it. And I learned an important lesson. Users lie when they don't know they're lying, right? I won't say they're evil, right? Because they don't know they're lying when they say it, but like they don't know, right? So over the years, I've gotten much better at user research, asking questions you don't ever ask, do you like it? Because it's an irrelevant question. I don't care if they like it. Exactly as I think Michael said, like, how are they going to use it? What problems do they solve? And, you know, ask a lot of questions. One important thing is, especially if I'm the product person or I'm the founder, so it happens, I don't ever tell people I built it. I tell people that I'm doing this study on behalf of this company, and you know, I just want to get your feedback. My job is to get your feedback, whether you like it, hate it, or whatever. But let's do a user interview. And so I do a user interview, definitely ask them questions, but let them talk a lot. And try not to interrupt, and definitely try not to be biased, or bias them, I should say. And but at the end, there's other companies, I think, you know, depends on the company, they actually pre-sell it. Like, would you put money in it? Okay, here's your bill, right? And then they go build it, right? So there are companies that have tried that, and they are successful in that, right? Because the pain point is so great. The company is saying, yes, we need this. We will pay you now, knowing that you have been successful in the past building stuff. And so, you know, if you have that relationship, absolutely ask for money up front. I think there's a lot of ways to go about this, but don't assume users even understand their own pains to be able to tell you whether or not they'd use it outright. So don't trust users.
And that's how Tesla funds their new car. They get their free interest-free loans from their users who pay a couple $1,000s before the car is even built. So yeah, it's definitely a good method if you can somehow manage that one.
Yeah, I want to get to one question from Tanny, and I think that's more for the organizers. If the slides and recordings will be shared after. Yeah, we can definitely share the recording. As far as the slides, you know, the presenters are comfortable with it, we can certainly, you know, make those available, but it would be something that they could share.
Yeah, and we'll share them on Slack, so be sure to be on Slack to get them.
Right. Mark, we have another question for you. This one is, what is the top criteria to prioritize which product to focus on? Should it be revenue, cost reduction through automation, or profitability?
Well, I think this all depends on the companies, right? And what they're going for. You know, right now I'm director of the knowledge program at Broadway. And so my product is making sure we collect knowledge, which is really fascinating because it's actually, it was a problem that I chose because it's so strange. And I treat it like a product. And I tell you, I love revenue. And I have been working so hard to prove that the knowledge team, which is usually a cost, can be revenue positive. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm working on it, right? And so, you know, it's very hard to argue with revenue, but sometimes it is cost reduction, right? I will just tell you, cost reduction is very hard to prove unless everything is well measured and you don't have tons of variables, right? So knowledge, it's cost reduction because you save people time, right? The problem is, how do you measure how many people and how much time is saved? And, you know, you can't, right? Because we don't make people bill by the hour or by the minute. So definitely it's about the company, what the culture of the company values, what they're saying their OKRs and KPIs are. But I will tell you, revenue is always an important number. You can't go wrong with revenue. Definitely there's other KPIs that are culturally valuable. You can hit those, but I would say revenue.
Great. Michael or Les, you want to share some of your prioritization techniques and some of the things that you guys typically think about?
I tend to think about it as a supply chain type of situation where ultimately you want revenue. But revenue, depending on the company and where they're at in the runway, you may not have to achieve that first. It could be that what you need to do is prioritize. For example, Mark, I don't know how the data is being used at your company, but at our company, for example, we are a data aggregator. So we connect to all these different systems and all these connected devices. And that's a metric we're tracking, is how many connected devices out of the thousands that are out there do we have connection to? And sure, we can build one connection at a time, but there's also companies out there that group these together. And so we're like, we'll just connect with these groupers and do that. That costs money. And yes, we're picking up users, and of course we're picking up engagement on those devices, but it's not a dollars and cents type thing. But the idea is, what can we do once we have this data? What will this data allow us to do, and what value can we generate? So I think of the data as the raw materials that we need to power the way that we target our patients, right? And we have more data to utilize that. And if we have more data points to hook off of that, then our analytics capabilities are better. And that's where we'll make our money. So you may want to, you have to use it in terms of a journey. What is the right next thing for you to focus on? And that can change. And I think Melissa Perry has a really good sense for that with the product kata that she uses, which really talks about this problem to solve. And this is a target you focus on, and kind of conduct experiments to come to that conclusion. And that could change again. The idea is that there's always this, what is that best thing that we can do? And I feel like that's really easy to run with as an organization.
So my thought to add to this is, I don't think that there's any one criteria that you would use depending on your situation, right? So it could be, revenue driven is always a big one, but it could also be things that actually kind of still drive revenue, but things that might drive adoption or give you a competitive advantage, or build your trusted partnership with your customer, or your customer base or market base. Technology could be one as well, right? You could have a platform that's built on a technology that's going out of support, and you have to make a decision. Do you want to continue to invest in that application, even though it might drive a significant amount of revenue, versus maybe looking at ways of building migration plans to different products? There's a lot of, I don't think it's just a simple answer. I do think in the end, it ultimately leads to revenue. But in the interim, deciding on what you're going to work on is not necessarily directly revenue based. So
I will follow up with that. You're absolutely right. Not everything is directly revenue based, but if you can do just a little bit of extra data analysis and show the revenue, right?
Sure, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's because I was able to show, like, we knocked sharing up, right? 60%, but that has no meaning. Like, yeah, yay, we're sharing more referrals, but I know ultimately at the end, the goal of sharing referrals is to bring more people in, and more people in to increase revenue. And I could have done the talent side, but the goal of bringing talent in is making our talent marketplace bigger. And I'm like, that's not going to really tie me to revenue, really. I can't measure revenue there, but I can measure revenue on the client side, and that's why I went that way. And it did take me 3 months to connect all the data dots and get our data clean, that I could actually say, here's the data analysis, and this is what we can prove. But I think that it wasn't, it was 3 months, but it wasn't like 3 months of full-time work. It was just like a little time here and there throughout those 3 months.
Yep. So we're close to the 9 o'clock time. So that means we have a couple more questions to go. But one question for Michael had in the business model, had a lot of experiments, and in the short time that you had, what kind of experiments did you run, and how did you go about knocking some out, or making sure some were worth pursuing? What kind of experiments did you run, basically?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we spent a lot of time on kind of early on one of the days, really just coming up with experiments that solved uncertainties. So really what we had to do is list out what all of our uncertainties were and prioritize those uncertainties. And then create a list of experiments. And then some of the things that I remember we did when we created our experiments is we create an experiment, or we create an idea of an experiment, and then try to decide, is that actually doable in a short period of time, and does it give us the result that we need to move forward? And so we used that as criteria as well to try to decide what experiments we're going to use. And really, ultimately, we were trying to figure out what experiments could we run that had the greatest amount of impact that would drive what our MVP turned out to be. And those were primarily around, you know, what features added the most value? Did we have the right data? You know, would people use it? How would people find it? Then when we moved into sort of a marketing efforts, how do you best market the product or your feature? Did we have a free trial or not? There was a bunch of experiments around that. We changed up things on our web page, on our landing page. Do we include pricing? Do we not include pricing? Do we tier the offerings was another experiment that we ran, and really just put a landing page out there just to see what people engaged and clicked on. We did one where we put a sample report on the landing page and ran it for a week behind an email gate, and ran it for a week without an email gate to see if that actually changed whether people would download it or not. And yeah, definitely changed it. But we were still running things like Hotjar where we could tell if somebody actually clicked on it, but it didn't go anywhere. Yeah, so there's a variety of different things that we decided, but it was really about what we could learn in a very short period of time that could have the greatest amount of impact in the product moving forward.
Les, you mentioned something about diversity in when you're hedging, or you're not hedging, when you're figuring out your risk or the bets to take, and so you kind of wanted to go. Did you mean diversity amongst product managers or customers on that one? Do you mean to say we should be talking to several customers or a team that'll keep us honest and just think in a different way than we do?
I think both. It depends. I feel like designers are more engaged with diversity in terms of the individuals they're researching. With product, it's individuals within the company. So usually your job of saying no to 50 things to say yes to the one or two means that you interact with all the different departments, sales, marketing, sales ops, and implementations, and all of that. And even within the product management team, you have a number of product owners and managers managing different stacks within the products or different products. And it's best to do your job. It's individual work, but it's best done in community with people that help you come to decisions quicker. And so it's if you're in a position of hiring, it's really great to hire someone that complements you with their motivation, reinforcing areas and maybe you're weak in. These aren't necessarily strengths, right? Or skill sets. Like you need someone who can prototype better than you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way that people see the world, for example. They see the world either through relations or they process the world through thinking. And thinkers are great, but they don't act a whole lot. And so they wait and wait and wait, and they think, and they can incubate forever. You need to have someone to spur that individual to action. And that best occurs when you have someone in the team that has that motivation, right?
Awesome. Thank you. So do we have one last question for them all?
Yeah, I think we could squeeze one more in, I guess. So one of the things I wanted to ask actually was Les, you mentioned the concept of a pre-mortem, which is relatively new to me. I haven't really heard of that much. How do you generally conduct those in a way that they're effective? Because they're obviously very hypothetical, right? You're trying to look into the future. So how do you conduct that in a way that you get meaningful insight from folks involved?
It's a new concept. And first of all, the concept came, I forgot from the individual. I got it from Thinking Fast and Slow, a book by Daniel Kahneman, because it talks about biases, just one after the other, all these different biases, and how you overcome them and are aware of them in terms of product. But even design sprints and frameworks like that have built into it this concept of let's get everybody's bad thinking out in this short period of time. Get all your concerns out, and you create the space and really create you give people permission to problems that I'm thinking about. And because no one wants to be labeled as negative, but at the same time, they have these general concerns. And so I think clearly giving them the space to do so. Say, here's a decision. We've talked about it. We've been very productive with how we're doing, but let's take this time period, and I'm really interested in, and then you set the stage with, you know, how you're going to introduce it. And the case that I've heard best is that let's fast forward. It's a year from now. So you're creating a brainstorming type of environment. And at that point, you say, let's figure out why this thing failed. And then it's the opposite. Instead of looking for great ideas, and everybody has to have a really good idea and build on the idea of others and all the other things you hear from innovation techniques and folks like IDEO, it's the opposite, right? You're encouraging people to consider and think about how this thing could fail. And I think it doesn't have to take a very long time. It can happen very quickly, and as long as you give the space and the permission for people to do so. So it's all about facilitation.
I have something real quick to share on that.
Yeah.
When I run A/B tests, I always try to think of the positive and the negative. If this succeeds, why do I believe it would have succeeded, right? And there might be multiple reasons, but I think it's equally important to understand if this fails, why do I think it would have failed? And then I try to come up with the reasons. And then when you actually run the A/B test and you come back, you can kind of evaluate it. And you still want to look at, you know, if it succeeded, you still want to look at why you thought it would fail, and kind of like, you know, kind of check the data and see like, oh, did I prove these things wrong, or does these things not get proven at all? But I think it's important to always have an expectation of the positive and the negative before you go into an A/B test, so that you're, of course, less biased, but also you kind of know why you have expectations on why you think it might fail or succeed, so you can test that.
All right, thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark, Les, and Michael. This was great. Some feedback has been coming to me through the chats that this was really good presentation, really good content, really good Q&A. So thank you so much for the content that you guys provided today. Thanks for our sponsors, which is Accruent and ProductHired. Just a reminder to go to the Slack page, Product in Austin. That's where we'll be posting the recordings and the slides if we're allowed to present them from the presenters. So really appreciate your time. Reminder that we should be having something next month, so keep an eye out for that as well in the Slack channel, Product in Austin again, and that one's in the product event channel there. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night. See you next month.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Easy.